It's been a
Two
deeply personal journey for
microphones,
me, and having
no
you here makes it.
live
I
crowd,
completely
no
understand. It's about
applause,
sharing our truths
no
and supporting each other.
elevated stage to retreat to. This wasn't late-night TV. It was just a table, two chairs, and nowhere to hide behind jokes or friendly edits. Meghan Markle was no stranger to interviews and microphones. She'd told her story before, in front of millions, but this time she sat opposite someone who hadn't come to smile, nod and move on. And over the course of one evening, what started as a calm, almost gentle podcast chat drifted into territory nobody in that room had fully anticipated. The studio was still. Two women faced each other, a pair of microphones perfectly lined up between them. Soft studio lights washed the room in a warm glow. Bookshelves framed the scene. A small table held two glasses of water, barely touched. On camera, it looked peaceful, controlled, almost cozy. Underneath that surface, something else was present. A quiet pressure, a subtle charge in the air. Candace sat upright, shoulders relaxed but posture alert. No papers, no laptop, no prepared note cards. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers near the mic. Her eyes never wandered. They stayed on her guest. Not hostile, not deferential, just intensely present. Meghan, legs crossed, spine straight, carried a familiar poise. Her expression was composed, her delivery practiced. It was the look of someone who had spent years on film sets and red carpets, someone used to steering conversations rather than being steered by them. Candace opened in a low, even voice. "First off, Meghan, thanks for agreeing to sit down with me. People have heard a lot about you. I wanted to hear from you." Meghan offered a measured smile, head tilting slightly. "Of course, I'm glad we can have a real conversation." The opening stretch flowed easily. Meghan spoke about tabloids, pressure, relentless cameras, and what it felt like to be constantly debated by strangers. Her language was careful. Her hands moved just enough to underline her points. She emphasized empathy, misunderstanding, and the emotional cost of becoming a symbol instead of a person. Candace didn't jump in. She didn't overreact or rush to agree. She just listened, eyes steady, chin slightly lifted. That alone made the moment feel different. Meghan was used to interviewers cutting in, cushioning questions, smoothing rough edges. Here, Candace gave the silence room to stretch, as if she wanted the audience to sit with Meghan's words and then inspect them. After a few minutes, Candace leaned in a fraction. "There's something I'm picking up on," she said, voice still calm. "You spend a lot of time describing how all of this made you feel, but not much time on why things unfolded the way they did." The air tightened. For a split second, Meghan's smile held in place, then faltered at the edges. She pulled in a breath, steadied herself, gaze fixed straight ahead. "People stopped listening," she answered, her voice now edged with steel, "because they chose not to care, not because I stopped telling the truth." Candace gave a slow nod. "That's one explanation," she said evenly. "What's another?" Meghan's fingers wrapped more firmly around her glass. That was the first visible crack. No one had raised their voice. No one had hurled an insult, but something had shifted. This was no longer a soft focus interview. The balance in the room was tilting, and Meghan could feel control beginning to slip from her hands. She took a deliberate sip of water, buying a few seconds. The pause was not random, it was seasoned. She'd learned long ago that silence could be a tool, a way to reset the stage without saying a word. When she spoke again, her tone was smoother, layered with calm. "It's very easy," Meghan said, "to sit outside of a situation and dissect it like it's a case study. But when you're living inside it, when it's your day-to-day reality, it isn't clean or academic. Most hosts would have softened there, most would have nodded, offered sympathy, pivoted. Candace did not. Her face didn't relax, her voice didn't bend to make things easier. "Do you believe criticism always comes from people who don't understand?" Meghan tilted her head again, that familiar gesture returning. "Not always," she replied, "but very often, yes." Candace accepted that with a small nod. "All right, let me put it another way." She laced her fingers together. "You've said many times that you felt shut down or muted, yet you've also had huge platforms, global interviews, a major documentary, best-selling projects. How does someone who's supposedly been silenced manage to be heard everywhere?" The dynamic changed. This time Meghan didn't smile. "That's a very narrow way of framing it," she said. "Being seen and being free are not the same thing. Holding a microphone doesn't guarantee that people are actually hearing you." Candace's eyes didn't budge. "But listening is a two-way street, isn't it?" Meghan's jaw flexed. "I listen plenty," she shot back. "I listen to people who've been ignored, to women who feel erased, to—" "I'm sure you do," she said. "My question is whether you listen to people who think you might be wrong." For the first time, Meghan let out a small, clipped laugh. "Disagreement is fine," she replied. "Disrespect is something else." Candace replied instantly. "And who gets to decide where disagreement ends and disrespect begins?" The question landed with more weight than the words themselves. Meghan straightened. "When people outright question my honesty, my motives, my lived reality, that's not healthy disagreement, that's invalidation." Candace's voice remained steady. "Or," she said quietly, "it's people asking you to be accountable." That word stayed in the air. Accountability. Meghan's eyes tightened at the corners. "There's a line," she said. "There's accountability, and then there's cruelty." "I agree," she replied, "but there's also a line between cruelty and simply feeling uncomfortable." Meghan leaned forward now, energy shifting from calm to guarded. "So what are we really doing here?" she asked, "because this doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like an interrogation dressed up as a podcast." Candace didn't pull back. "I'm looking at patterns," she said. "Every environment you've left gets described as toxic afterwards. Every falling out becomes harm. Every critique becomes trauma." Meghan's fingers curled tighter. "That is an incredibly distorted picture," she snapped. "You're reducing an entire life into bullet points." Candace nodded slowly again. "And you're treating every tough question as if it's a personal attack." For a moment, the only sounds were the faint whir of equipment and the light chime of glass touching wood. The surface politeness had evaporated. The tension was no longer in the background. It sat right between them. Meghan spoke first. "I came into this space in good faith," she said. "I didn't come here to be put on trial." Candace's reply stayed level but unyielding. "And I didn't invite you here just to congratulate you." That was the break. Whatever polite distance had been in place at the start was gone. This was no longer royal titles or headlines anymore. It was about who had control of the story in this room and who was losing it. Meghan slowly recrossed her legs, a familiar, polished movement, but beneath the composure something was fraying. "You know," she began, voice tight but still controlled, "this is exactly what people mean when they talk about hostile spaces that pretend to be open dialogue." Candace lifted an eyebrow. "Hostile in what way?" "You're boxing me in," Meghan replied. "You're taking years of complicated experience and flattening it into a version that plays well to your base." Candace held her tongue, letting Meghan finish. "And honestly," she continued, "it feels intentional." Intentional, calculated, that was the word that hung there. Candace leaned a little closer, forearms resting lightly on her chair arms. "Nothing here is hidden," she said. "There are cameras, mics, no secret edits waiting in the wings, just questions put to you in real time." Meghan shook her head.
Questions built on assumptions, she said, questions designed to corner me. Candace's smile was faint but cool. Every question comes from somewhere, she replied. The real issue is whether you're willing to actually answer it. The rope between them pulled tighter. Meghan exhaled through her nose. Why does it upset you so much, she asked, when a woman speaks openly about her pain? Candace didn't pause. It doesn't bother me, she said. What does concern me is when pain turns into a shield, something no one's allowed to question, and when disagreement gets treated as betrayal. Meghan's eyes flashed.
That's a very dismissive way of putting it. No, Candace said just as calmly, that's me analyzing what I see. Meghan leaned in, voice sharper now. You're sitting here judging choices you've never had to make, she said. You weren't living under that kind of spotlight. You didn't have your every breath spun into a headline. Candace didn't blink. I don't need a crown or a castle to understand that influence comes with responsibility, she replied. The silence that followed felt dense. Meghan let out a short laugh with no warmth in it. So we're trading one-liners, she said. Candace gave a faint shrug. You've given the world your share of memorable quotes, she said. You know how this works. That landed hard. Meghan's posture stiffened. I've shared my reality, she said firmly, and I won't say sorry for that. I'm not asking you to apologize, Candace replied. I'm asking if it's ever crossed your mind that your version of events might not be the only one that matters. Meghan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. That is incredibly insulting, she said. It's human, Candace answered. The microphones picked up a soft inhale as Meghan tried to compose herself again. So let me get this straight, Meghan said. You invite me on under the banner of conversation and then spend the time picking apart who I am. Candace didn't raise her volume. I'm not dissecting your identity, she said. I'm looking at whether your story lines up over time. That was the pivot. Meghan's hand dropped hard onto the armrest, her fingers clenching. This, she said, voice losing its earlier smoothness, is exactly why so many women stop engaging in spaces like this. Candace tilted her head. Or it's why some people get uncomfortable when they're no longer the only ones directing how the story is told. Meghan stared at her. For a heartbeat it seemed like she might let out another brittle laugh, or simply stand up, or say something that crossed a point of no return. Instead, she said quietly, I don't think this is a healthy conversation anymore. Candace inclined her head once. That's your decision to make, she replied. Meghan's eyes flicked for a fraction of a second towards the cameras. In that brief look, it became obvious, whatever she'd expected to happen here, this wasn't it. The tension wasn't just rising now, it had reached its breaking point. No one spoke for several seconds. The mics captured tiny sounds, the faint hum of the lighting system, the rustle of fabric as Meghan shifted, the soft tap of glass on wood. This silence wasn't awkward, it felt like a conclusion. Candace sat motionless, hands folded, posture unchanged. She was no longer pressing, no longer probing. She didn't have to. The conversation had hit the stage where it simply carried its own weight. Meghan broke the quiet again. I want to make something very clear, she said, voice hard-won and strained. I came here expecting mutual respect. What I'm getting feels more like suspicion dressed up as interest. Candace nodded one time. And I want to be just as clear, she answered. Respect doesn't mean automatic agreement. It doesn't mean being shielded from uncomfortable topics. Meghan's lips thinned. You keep calling them uncomfortable topics, she said, but these questions are framed as if I'm guilty of something. They assumed bad intent from the start. Candace's tone stayed flat, not unkind, not soft. They assume you have power, she said, and power comes with responsibility. That's not an accusation, it's a reality. There it was again, responsibility.
Meghan gave a short, incredulous laugh. You say that like it's neutral, like responsibility hasn't been used for years to shut women down and tell them to stay quiet. Candace didn't roll her eyes. She didn't smirk. Responsibility isn't the same thing as silence, she said. It's about owning how your choices affect others. That gets uncomfortable when you're used to defining the situation on your own terms. Meghan leaned back, rubbing her forehead lightly before dropping her hand. This is exhausting, she said. Every time I speak publicly, there's someone ready to jump in and explain why I shouldn't have, or why I'm wrong for how it made me feel. That's not what I'm doing, Candace replied, voice gentle but unwavering. Oh, really? Meghan snapped. Then what are you doing? Candace looked straight at her. This is what it looks like when a narrative meets scrutiny. The air felt tighter with every word. Meghan's composure finally, visibly gave way, not with tears or shouting, but in the set of her shoulders and the new edge in her voice. You benefit from dragging me, she said. That's what's happening. You know exactly how framing me this way plays with your audience. Candace took a slow breath before answering. My audience doesn't need me to destroy you. They can hear what's being said and decide for themselves. Meghan's volume climbed slightly. No, you're not truly listening, she said. You're waiting. You're waiting for a slip, a contradiction, something you can replay and dissect. Candace shook her head. In contradictions don't need a trap, she replied. They show up on their own if they're there. That line hit hard. Meghan stared at her, eyes bright. You know what's really ironic, she said. You accuse me of being obsessed with narrative, but you walked in here having already decided who I am. I walked in prepared to ask questions. The way you respond, that's entirely on you. Silence settled again, sharper now, charged with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Meghan glanced briefly off camera, then back. This is exactly why I've stepped back from certain spaces, she said. They pretend to be neutral, but operate from a place of constant attack. Candace leaned forward just a little for the first time in several minutes. Neutral doesn't mean painless, and being challenged isn't the same thing as being targeted. Meghan shook her head. No, this is targeting. You're questioning my motives, my honesty, my character, over and over again. Candace's answer was firm but even. When someone's public story seems to change depending on who's listening, then asking direct questions isn't personal, it's necessary. That line drew an invisible line across the room. Meghan's grip on the armrests tightened, her breathing picked up just enough to notice. I'm not going to sit here and be pulled apart by someone whose whole brand involves doubting women when they speak. Candace didn't flinch. I'm not telling you your experience didn't happen. I'm asking whether every conclusion you've drawn from it is beyond question. Meghan let out a louder, cutting laugh. Oh, come on, she said. That's a word game. No, that's what accountability looks like. Meghan stood up. It was a smooth movement, but abrupt all the same. Her chair scraped quietly against the floor. She didn't look at Candace immediately. She checked her jacket, straightened her shoulders, gathered herself. I'm finished, she said. This isn't a dialogue anymore. Candace stayed where she was. That's your prerogative, she said softly. Meghan's eyes blazed as she finally faced her. You never wanted a conversation. You wanted a spectacle. Candace held her gaze. Clashes happen when a story stops being able to answer hard questions, not when the questions are asked. Meghan shook her head, almost laughing in disbelief. This is unreal. You bring me in under the impression this will be fair, and then you ambush me. Candace still didn't move. There was no trap. Nothing was staged. You were just asked things you didn't anticipate. Meghan's exhaled sharply and reached for her mic cable. I'm done, she said. I'm not going to keep feeding this. She unclipped the microphone carefully and laid it down on the table with deliberate precision, then picked up her bag. Candace watched, expression unreadable. As Meghan walked towards the exit, Candace spoke one last time. Her voice didn't rise, didn't chase her out of the room. Leaving doesn't wipe out the questions, it just means they still need answers. Meghan paused for a half-breath at the doorway. She didn't look back. The door shut quietly behind her. The room felt suddenly larger, emptier. The echo of the walkout hung in the air. Candace sat there in silence, hands still folded, eyes fixed on the now vacant chair across from her. There was no triumphant smile, no gloating, just a settled, steady calm. Eventually, she turned slightly towards the camera. "This isn't about winning or losing," she said. "It's about truth, and truth can feel very different when it isn't rehearsed in advance." She let the words sit for a moment. "We'll be right back." The shot faded. Outside that quiet studio, the story was already bigger than the room, moving into comment sections, group chats, reaction videos, and debates that would keep spinning long after the podcast ended. Not because someone walked out, but because someone, for once, didn't look away from the uncomfortable parts. If this story challenged you, raised questions, or made you think twice about what you just watched, that's exactly what it was meant to do. These conversations don't really end when the cameras stop, they just move into new spaces. If you'd like more stories and breakdowns,